Well, welcome back, all you wonderful listeners out there. For those just joining us, welcome. You found us. If you don't know us yet, we're Static After Dark. I'm your host tonight, Lucy. This is where we live, the hours nobody else wants, the stories nobody else tells, the corners of the world that get a little too quiet after midnight. If you're still awake, if you're still listening at this hour, you're one of us. Pull up a chair. You belong here. Just a heads up, we unpack some really heavy dark stuff on this channel. If that's not what you need right now, feel free to skip this one. No judgment. We'll be here when you're ready. Tonight's story is one we've been sitting on for a while, waiting for the right night, because this one is different. It's not about monsters in the woods. It's not about cults or secret societies or anything you can point at and say, there, that's the villain. It's about letters. Plain white envelopes, handwritten addresses, no return stamp, and inside them, other people's worst secrets. The kind of things people bury so deep they take them to their grave. The kind of things that, if exposed, would unravel everything. Their marriage, their reputation, their whole damn life. In 1976, a small town in Ohio woke up to find these letters in their mailboxes. At first, people figured it was a prank, someone being nasty, someone with a grudge. But the letters didn't stop. They got worse, more specific and more cruel. And the handwriting was always the same, identical over and over, like someone had spent a long time perfecting a disguise and then committed to it completely. For 2 years, this town's entire way of life collapsed. People stopped trusting each other, marriages fell apart, careers were destroyed, and somewhere in all of that, someone died. I'm not going to tell you how this one ends, not yet, because the ending is why we're here tonight. Stay with me, this is a deep dive. By the time we're done, you're going to have questions nobody's ever been able to answer. Pull the blankets up, keep the lights low, pour yourself a cuppa or something strong if you need it. Buckle up, let's get into it. Let's set the scene properly. Because you need to understand what Circleville was before all this started. You need to understand what was lost. Circleville, Ohio. Pickaway County, Central Ohio. About 25 miles south of Columbus. In 1976, we're talking maybe 6,000 people. County seat, which gave it a courthouse, a few banks, a main street with a diner, a hardware store, and a five and dime. The kind of place where the biggest event of the year was the county fair. The kind of place where everyone knew your name, and half of them knew your business before you did. It was a good place to live by all accounts. Quiet, safe, trustworthy. People left their doors unlocked. Neighbours looked out for each other. The worst crime in recent memory had been a stolen lawnmower, and some drunk idiot causing trouble at the Labour Day picnic. The churches were full on Sundays. The high school football team drew decent crowds on Friday nights. There was a local paper that covered everything from zoning disputes to the 4-H Club's annual bake sale. Small town America at its most stereotypical, most innocent. And then, in August 1976, everything changed. The first letters appeared out of nowhere. No warning and no explanation. Just plain white envelopes, handwritten addresses, no return stamp, and inside, accusations. Now, when I say accusations, I don't mean vague hints or petty gossip. These were detailed and specific, names, dates, locations and circumstances, the kind of information that would take someone either a lot of time watching and listening or access to things people thought were private. Take the first major target. Let's call her Margaret. She was a respected woman in the community, church choir and the PTA. Baked for every fundraiser, showed up at every funeral. She got a letter accusing her of a years-long affair with a man from the next county over. The letter named him, gave dates, described in clinical detail where and when they'd met. Margaret said it was a lie. She showed the letter to her husband, fully expecting him to be outraged on her behalf, to defend her. Her husband believed the letter. That's the thing I want you to hold on to after Darkers. The letters didn't need to be true to do damage. They just needed to be believable. And in a small town where everyone knew everyone, almost everything was believable. Within weeks, Margaret's marriage was in crisis. Not because her husband had proof, but because the letter had given him questions. And in a marriage, if you start looking for answers to questions you shouldn't be asking, you'll find them, whether they're real or not. The letters spread. 5, 6, and 7 people received them. Each one is carefully crafted. Each one is designed to wound. And here's what investigators found significant. Every single letter had the same handwriting. Identical letter formations, same spacing, same pen pressure, same quirks, almost childlike, like someone had practiced disguising their natural script and settled on this particular shaky, uneven scrawl. But perfectly consistent, over and over and over. Whoever was writing these letters had taken the time to perfect this disguise. They had committed to it, and they were good at it, really good. The writer also had a very specific voice. They weren't just accusing people, they were judging them, condemning them, and they almost always used plural pronouns. We know what you've done. We see you. We remember. This matters after Darkers because it suggests one of 2 things. Either the writer wanted to seem like they represented a larger group, a community watchdog, a moral authority, or they were deeply delusional. They believed they were the voice of something bigger than themselves. Or both. These letters weren't just harassment. They were performing. Someone was playing a role. Someone was standing in judgment over this entire community, one mailbox at a time, and the town didn't know how to fight back. Who do you call when the enemy is anonymous? Who do you accuse when every neighbour looks the same? The police were overwhelmed, not by volume, but by invisibility. There was nothing to investigate, no leads, no evidence, just paper and malice. So people suffered in silence, or they fought each other, or they spiralled, and the letters kept coming. Now let's talk about the target who would eventually become the centre of this entire story, Mary Gillispie. Mary was 32 years old in 1976. She worked as a school bus driver for the local school district, running Route 7, which picked up kids from the rural outskirts and brought them into the elementary school in town. By all accounts, she was patient, reliable, and well-liked. The kind of driver who knew every kid on her route by name, who remembered birthdays, who looked out for the shy ones. She was married to Ron Gillispie. Ron was a truck driver, long hauls, away from home a lot, but he loved his family. 2 kids, a modest house on the outskirts of town, the kind of life that was simple but good if you didn't mess it up. Mary and Ron had their struggles, like any marriage, but nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that would prepare them for what was coming. The letters to Mary started in late summer 1976, right around when the other letters were circulating, and hers were particularly vicious. The letters accused Mary of having an ongoing affair with a local farmer. Let's call him Tom. Tom was married too, and he had kids. Tom was, according to the letter, a deacon at his church. The letters named Tom explicitly. They gave a timeline. They claimed Mary and Tom had been meeting at a barn on Tom's property for months. They described the route Mary would drive, the time she'd take, the excuses she'd use. Mary said it was all lies. Complete fabrication. Tom said the same thing. They showed the letters to each other and agreed. Someone was trying to destroy them. But here's where it gets complicated after Darkers. The letters weren't just sent to Mary. They were sent to her husband, to Tom's wife, to the school superintendent, to the pastor at Mary's church, to Tom's business partners, to their neighbours, to people who had never even met these 2 people, but now knew their alleged secrets. The writer wasn't content to simply accuse. They were constructing a web. They wanted every person connected to Mary and Tom to know. They wanted the whole community to weigh in. They wanted judgment. And they got it. Ron Gillispie, Mary's husband, started to change. At first, he was supportive. He knew the letters were lies. He knew someone was targeting his wife. But as the letters kept arriving, as the details got more specific, as other people in town started whispering, something in Ron shifted. He became obsessed with the letters. He talked about them constantly. He started investigating on his own, mapping out potential suspects, interrogating Mary about Tom, going over the letters line by line, looking for clues. He barely slept. He barely ate. He started picking fights with Mary over things that didn't matter, things that felt like proxies for the accusation he couldn't shake. This is what these letters did after Darkers. They didn't just attack their targets. They infected the entire social fabric of the town. They made people question things they shouldn't have to question. They planted doubt like a virus, and doubt, once it's in your head, is almost impossible to remove. Mary insisted on her innocence, over and over, but she was fighting an enemy she couldn't see, fighting for a truth she couldn't prove. And every time she protested, every time she said, "I didn't do this," It started to sound less like a denial and more like someone covering their tracks. That's the trap. That's the horror of it. The more you defend yourself, the guiltier you look. By November 1976, the Gillispie marriage was in serious trouble, not because of what Mary had or hadn't done, but because of what Ron believed, or was starting to believe, or couldn't stop himself from wondering about. And the letters kept targeting them both. More letters, new details, fresh accusations. Every few days, another envelope, another wound. I need you to hold on to this image after darkers. A woman sitting at her kitchen table, exhausted, trying to explain to her husband that she's innocent of something she never did. And his face, not angry, not dismissive, doubtful, like he's hearing a confession he doesn't want to hear. That's what the Circleville Writer did to people. That's the power of a well-placed letter. And this was just the beginning. December 22nd, 1976, 6 days before Christmas. It had been a rough few weeks for the Gillespies. The letters had gotten worse, more frequent, more specific, and more cruel. Ron was not the man he used to be. He was paranoid, short-tempered, and sleep-deprived. Mary was walking on eggshells. The marriage was fraying at every seam. That evening, the phone rang. Now, the exact details of this phone call have shifted over the decades. Inconsistencies in witness accounts, the fog of time, and the way trauma rewrites memory. But the core elements are consistent across every version of the story. Someone called the Gillispie residence. Someone spoke to Ron Gillispie. And whoever it was claimed to be the letter writer. This wasn't a threat. This was a taunt. I've been watching you, Ron. You can't catch me. Your wife belongs to someone else now. Something along those lines, designed to push a man who was already on the edge completely over it. And Ron snapped. He didn't call the police. He didn't try to trace the call. And in 1976, that would have been nearly impossible anyway. He didn't talk to Mary about it, didn't warn her, didn't explain what he was doing. Ron Gillispie stood up from the phone. He walked to the bedroom. He retrieved his .38 caliber revolver from the dresser drawer. He put it in his waistband. He grabbed his car keys. And he drove. Out into the December darkness, out into the rural roads around Circleville, following some destination in his mind, a theory, a suspect, a confrontation he'd been building toward for weeks. We don't know exactly where he was going. Some accounts suggest Ron had been investigating on his own and had narrowed down his list of suspects to 1 or 2 names. He may have had reason to believe that person would be somewhere out in the rural areas that night. Maybe at a barn, maybe at a property corner, maybe parked on a lonely road. He went looking for them, and he never came home. His car was found the next morning, December 23rd, 1976, in a ditch alongside a rural road about 3 miles from the Gillispie home. The car had significant front-end damage, consistent with a high-speed collision, but there was no other vehicle at the scene, no other car, no other body, no tyre tracks leading away, just a wrecked car, a dead man, and silence. Ron Gillispie was found in the driver's seat. He died on impact, according to the coroner's report. But here's what made this worse. Here's what has haunted this case from the very beginning. Ron Gillespie's gun had been fired once. 1 shot. Discharged into the December night. But there was no target, no victim, no confrontation. Not a physical one, at least. No second party at the scene, no witnesses, no shell casings from any weapon except Ron's own. What did Ron shoot at? What was he firing at? Did he see someone or think he saw someone and fire? Did he fire into the air in frustration and lose control of his car? Did something else happen entirely? The initial police investigation ruled it an accident. A grieving, paranoid man who snapped under the pressure of relentless harassment, drove out into the darkness, fired his weapon into the void, lost control and crashed. Case closed. But Mary's family wasn't buying it, and the letters weren't stopping. In fact, they were about to get worse. After Ron's death, the letters targeting Mary Gillispie changed. No longer were they just about alleged affairs. No longer were they just about secrets. They became triumphant, gloating, as if whoever was writing them had won. Ron got what was coming to him. The truth always comes out. Maybe next time you'll learn to keep your legs closed. Ron should have watched his back. These weren't just harassment anymore, they were victory letters. The writer was celebrating. They had destroyed a marriage, and now they had helped destroy a man. Or at least that's what they wanted Mary to believe. And here's what deeply, deeply disturbed investigators. The letters that came after Ron's death were somehow more detailed than the ones before, as if the writer had been watching the Gillispie family from the inside. As if they knew things they couldn't have known from outside observation alone. How did they know so much? How did they know about the phone call so quickly? How did they know what to write to hurt Mary most after losing her husband? Mary Gillispie became a person of interest to the community, not as a victim, as a suspect. People whispered, was she having an affair? Was she involved in Ron's death somehow? Did she know more than she was saying? Let that sink in after darkers. A woman loses her husband under mysterious circumstances. A car crash with no explanation, a gunshot with no target, and the community turns on her because of anonymous letters. That's the power of psychological warfare. It doesn't just attack you, it attacks your reality, makes people question what's true, who to believe, what happened right in front of them. Mary went from victim to suspect in the space of a few weeks, entirely because someone kept sending letters that said otherwise. And it wasn't just Mary. As 1977 rolled on, the letters spread to everyone. The local business owner who got letters accusing him of embezzling from his own company. The letters went to his partners, his accountant, his bank. It triggered an internal investigation that nearly bankrupted him before it was found to be completely fabricated. The church deacon, not Tom, a different one, who got letters claiming he'd been soliciting prostitutes on business trips. His wife got copies, his pastor got copies. He had to stand before his congregation and deny it. In a small-town church in 1976, that kind of accusation, even a denial, was its own special kind of public execution. The school teacher who got letters claiming she'd been having an affair with a current student. Completely false. Utterly fabricated. But the accusation was so horrifying that the school placed her on administrative leave pending investigation. Her career nearly destroyed. She was eventually cleared, but the damage was done. You can't unring that bell. These were the high-profile cases, the ones that made the papers, or would have, if the local paper hadn't been smart enough to stay away from it. But there were dozens of others, small embarrassments, petty secrets, affairs of the heart and affairs of the wallet, old grudges, hidden debts, petty crimes. The writer had a file on everyone, or at least that's what it felt like. The pattern started to emerge for investigators. The writer wasn't random. The targets had connections. Some people were targeted because they had something the writer wanted. Money, influence, property. Those letters had the flavour of extortion. Pay me, or I'll release this. Others were targeted for revenge. Old grudges, broken relationships, business rivalries. The writer was settling scores using the anonymity of the postal service. And a few were just pure cruelty. Random people with no obvious connection to the writer. People who were simply convenient targets. Someone with a secret, a weakness, something to exploit. The profile of the writer started to take shape. Someone with access to a wide range of people and information. Someone with deep, deep knowledge of Circleville's social networks, knowing who was sleeping with whom, who owed money to whom, and who had done what and when. Someone with a personal vendetta against multiple residents, because the letters weren't just exposing secrets, they were targeting people. Choosing them, someone with patience and discipline, someone who could maintain a perfectly consistent handwriting disguise for years without making a single mistake. And most chilling of all, someone who could do all of this without ever being caught. By late 1977, the town was tearing itself apart. People stopped answering their mail. People started watching their neighbours. People stopped going to church because they didn't know who was watching them there. The trust that held a small community together was rotting from the inside, one letter at a time. The police were under enormous pressure. There were no leads, no suspects, no evidence to follow. Just paper and malice and a town that was losing its mind. Until finally, they got a name. In early 1978, investigators focused their attention on William Bill Miller. Bill Miller, Mary's brother-in-law, Ron Gillespie's brother. Now, let's be clear about Bill Miller's relationship to this case, because it's central and it's complicated. Bill and Ron had a history. Not a good one. There were long-standing rumours of a dispute. Some say it was over an inheritance from their parents. Others say it was a business deal that went bad. Others say it was something older, something personal, something that had festered for years. Bill was reportedly jealous of Ron, resentful, the kind of resentment that grows in the dark and becomes something else entirely. And crucially, Bill lived near Circleville, close enough to know the social landscape, close enough to know who was sleeping with whom and who was hiding what, close enough to be a suspect. Bill Miller was arrested in early 1978. He was charged with multiple counts of harassment, intimidation, and related offences. He went to trial, and during the trial, a deeply disturbing piece of evidence was introduced. Remember how Ron Gillispie drove out into the darkness on December 22nd, 1976? Remember how his gun had been fired once, but there was no target? Remember how his car had crashed into something with no other vehicle at the scene? Investigators, after nearly 2 years of investigation, presented a theory to the court. They believed Bill Miller had set up some kind of booby trap at the location Ron was driving to. A weapon rigged to a fence post, a tripwire, or some kind of remote trigger. Ron arrived, confronted what he thought was a person, drew his weapon, fired, and something happened. A shot rang out from the fence line. Ron, startled and disoriented, lost control of his car. The prosecution argued that Bill had orchestrated his brother's death, that the phone call was a trap designed to lure Ron out of the house and onto that rural road, that the letters were Bill's way of tormenting his brother-in-law and destroying his marriage before eliminating him entirely. And Bill Miller was convicted. He was sentenced to prison. And then, here's where the story takes its strangest, most inexplicable turn. He was placed in solitary confinement. Not regular prison, solitary, isolated cell, 24-hour surveillance, no contact with other inmates, and critically after Darker's, he was denied all access to pen and paper. No pens, no pencils, no paper, no writing implements of any kind. His cell was searched daily, his visitors were monitored, his mail was confiscated and read before he ever saw it. The prison administration understood what they were dealing with. A man who had allegedly terrorised a community through written letters. A man who possibly killed his own brother. They locked him down completely. Cut him off from every possible way of putting pen to paper. But the letters kept arriving. I need you to understand the physical reality of Bill Miller's situation before we go any further, because what happened next is one of the most genuinely inexplicable things in all of American true crime. Bill Miller was held in a state prison. He was in a cell by himself. His cell was searched every single day. Guards checked on him regularly, every few hours, around the clock. He had no access to other inmates. His visitors were limited, monitored and recorded. Every piece of mail he received was opened and read before it reached him. Every piece of mail he sent was intercepted and examined. He had no pens, no pencils, no paper, no notebooks, no writing surfaces of any kind. Nothing. For months, Bill Miller sat in that cell, alone, watched, defenceless, and letters to Circleville residents continued to arrive, with the same handwriting, the same postmarks, the same level of specificity and cruelty, the same voice, same writer. Think about what this means after Darker's. Think about it. For a letter to be mailed from that prison, someone would have had to 1. Obtain writing materials, a pen, paper and an envelope, all of which were forbidden in that cell, all of which would have been discovered during the daily searches. 2. Write the letter in Bill Miller's unmistakable handwriting, a very specific, carefully practiced disguise that had been consistent across every single letter for 2 years. Someone would have had to have seen Bill's handwriting before he was imprisoned, studied it and learned to replicate it perfectly. 3. Get the letter out of the prison without detection. Pass it to a guard, a visitor, a mail handler. Somehow smuggle it out of a maximum security facility under 24-hour surveillance. And they would have had to do this multiple times because the letters kept arriving over the course of Bill's entire incarceration. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. The prison conducted its own internal investigation. Internal affairs got involved. They searched Bill's cell. They watched him constantly. They tested his clothing, his bedding, his belongings. They brought in forensic experts. They interviewed every guard who had contact with him. They found nothing. No writing materials. No hidden stash. No accomplice that anyone could identify. And yet the letters kept arriving. Now here's where it gets even stranger, because the story has one more layer that I haven't told you yet. Bill Miller's conviction was eventually overturned. Not because he was found to be innocent, let's be absolutely clear about that. The conviction was overturned on procedural grounds. Technical errors in the trial, a legal technicality. Bill Miller was released from prison, and when Bill Miller left, the letters stopped. Cold turkey. No more Circleville letters, no more mysterious mail, no more secrets delivered to doorsteps. After 2 years of terror, 2 years of harassment, 2 years of paranoia, the Circleville Writer went silent. So let me ask you this, After Darkers. If Bill Miller was the writer, why did the letters stop when he was released? If he had an accomplice on the outside who was mailing them, that accomplice could have continued indefinitely. Bill was free now. There was no reason to stop, unless the accomplice was doing it for Bill. Specifically for Bill, as part of some arrangement, and once Bill was out and the case was dismissed, the accomplice had no reason to continue. But that raises another question. Why would someone do that for Bill Miller? Who has that kind of loyalty? Who has that kind of obsession? And here's the other question nobody can answer. If Bill Miller was not the writer, if he was innocent, or at least not entirely responsible, then who was? Because when Bill left prison, the letters stopped, which means whoever was writing them was connected to Bill in some way. Either Bill was the writer or someone linked to Bill was. There's no clean exit from this, After Darkers. Every theory has a hole in it. All right, time to put on our detective hats and think through this together, because this case has never been solved and every theory comes with problems. Let's go through them. Theory 1, Bill Miller. Did it all. This is the official version. The police said Bill Miller wrote the Circleville letters. A jury agreed. He went to prison for it. But the biggest problem with this theory is the impossible prison letters. If Bill wrote them and he was in solitary with no access to writing materials, how did they get out? The answer most people give is, Bill must have had an accomplice, someone on the outside, maybe a family member, maybe a close friend, maybe a romantic partner, who had access to Bill's handwriting, understood his method, and continued the campaign while he was incarcerated. This is plausible. Someone could have obtained a sample of Bill's writing before he was imprisoned, could have studied it, could have practiced it, could have mailed letters on his behalf. But here's the problem with this answer. If Bill had an accomplice doing all the work while he was in prison, why did the letters stop when Bill was released? An accomplice would have had no reason to stop. Bill was free now. The letters could have continued. There was nothing stopping them. Unless the accomplice was only doing it for Bill, as a favour, as a promise, something specific, and once Bill was free, the job was done. The mission accomplished. But what was the mission? What was the goal? If Bill wanted to terrorise Circleville, why stop once he had his freedom? He could have continued indefinitely. He didn't, which means either Bill wasn't the writer at all, or his goal was something very specific, something that had a completion point, something that was achieved the moment he was freed. That's a very strange motivation to have. Theory 2. The booby trap. Let's talk about what might have happened to Ron Gillispie on December 22nd, 1976, because the booby trap theory has its own problems. Investigators believed Bill Miller had set up a weapon, a gun rigged to a fence post, a tripwire, some kind of trigger mechanism, along one of Ron's likely routes. Ron drove out there, confronted what he thought was a person, drew his weapon, fired, and something happened. What could that something be? Option A. A tripwire connected to a shotgun or rifle, set up along the road. Ron sees what appears to be a person standing in the darkness, raises his weapon, fires, and the sound or the sudden movement triggers the booby trap. A shot rings out from the fence line. Ron, startled, loses control of his car and crashes. Option B, someone was actually there, someone who called Ron, who dared him, who wanted him to come. That person was waiting. When Ron arrived, they confronted him. The gunshot was Ron defending himself, but whoever was there was prepared, returned fire, then fled the scene quickly and cleanly. No witnesses, no tracks, no evidence. Option C, Ron fired his weapon in frustration, into the air, into the darkness, into the void, while driving at high speed. The anger, the paranoia, the obsession all came to a head, and he snapped. Fired once, lost control, crashed, and the booby trap theory was constructed after the fact to explain the unexplainable. I want you to think about what it would take to set up a booby trap that kills someone. This isn't a movie. This isn't a novel. We're talking about a real person, in a real place, making a real decision to end another person's life. And if Bill Miller set up a booby trap for his own brother, what was the relationship between them really? What had festered for so long that one brother would kill the other using a weapon rigged to a fence post? That's the question that haunts this theory after darkers. Not did he do it, but how do you get to that point? Theory 3. Multiple writers. Here's the theory that, to me, has the most explanatory power and the least satisfaction. What if there was never just one Circleville writer? What if Bill Miller started the letters? Maybe in 1976, maybe earlier. And once word got out, once people in the town saw what these letters could do, others started writing them too. This would explain a lot. The impossible prison letters, Bill wrote some of them, maybe most of them. But once he was incarcerated, others, people who admired his work or people with their own grudges against the town, continued the tradition. They studied the letters, they copied the handwriting, they adopted the voice. They kept the campaign alive, using Bill's MO as a template. When Bill was released and the letters stopped, it stopped because the people who were copying him had achieved their own goals. They had their own secrets to settle, and once those were settled, or once they ran out of targets, or once the novelty wore off, they simply stopped. This theory suggests that Bill Miller was a writer, but not the writer, that the original architect of the Circleville letters was never caught at all. That terrifies me more than any other theory after darkers, because it means the real mastermind is still out there, or was, until they died, someone who figured out how to weaponize an entire community's secrets and then inspired others to do the same. Theory 4. The writer was never real. There's one more theory, and it's deeply unsettling. What if the writer wasn't a person at all? What if the Circleville Writer was a myth that the town constructed around itself? A story that grew in the telling, where every new letter added to the legend, until the legend became more real than the truth. This sounds absurd, but consider, small towns are breeding grounds for shared delusion. When everyone is afraid of the same thing, that fear becomes contagious. People start seeing patterns that aren't there. They start attributing things to the writer that might have other explanations. But this theory doesn't hold up to scrutiny either, because people received the letters, real physical letters, with specific handwriting, specific accusations, specific information. Someone wrote those, someone mailed them, so the writer was real. Someone did this, and we're probably never going to know who. Here's what I keep coming back to after darkers. The Circleville letters were about power. Not just revealing secrets, demonstrating control. The writer wasn't saying, I know your secret. They were saying, I can use your secret. I can destroy you with it. I can rewrite who you are in the eyes of your community. That's what the letters did. They didn't just expose secrets. They decided how those secrets would be understood, what they meant, who you were now, based on what you once did. And the writer could do this because they had information. They had access to things people thought were private. And they used that access to become a god over this small town. That's terrifying after darkers. Not because of the death, not because of the mystery, because of what it says about the power of information and the vulnerability of being known. The Circleville Writer case has become one of the great incompletely solved mysteries of American true crime. It's been written about in books, documented in TV specials, studied by criminologists, psychologists, handwriting experts, and obsessive internet sleuths who have been picking at it for decades. And it keeps generating questions that nobody can answer. Why Circleville? Why this town at this time? Some researchers have suggested that the town's social structure, close-knit, conservative, church-focused and reputation-driven, made it uniquely vulnerable to this kind of attack. In a community where what your neighbours think of you can make or break your life, an anonymous letter is the perfect weapon. You can't defend against it. You can't fight it. You can only watch as your reputation crumbles. Who started it? Was it really Bill Miller? Some researchers now believe he may have been a copycat, someone who started writing letters after hearing about the original writer's work, either to take credit or to deflect suspicion. Others believe Bill was the original, and the impossible prison letters were written by someone who visited him. Perhaps a family member, perhaps someone who had something to gain from Bill's silence. What really happened to Ron Gillispie? Was it murder? Accident? Suicide? The case was officially closed as an accident, a grieving, paranoid man who crashed while pursuing a phantom. But some investigators still believe there was a second party. Someone who called Ron, someone who lured him out, someone who may have been waiting. The Circleville letters ended in 1978. The town slowly recovered, or at least people stopped talking about it. The victims moved on. Some rebuilt their marriages, some didn't. The community put the experience behind it, the way small towns do, burying it under new stories, new scandals, new gossip, until the old one was just a shadow people, referenced when they wanted to sound mysterious. But the letters are still out there, in boxes in attics, in court records, in the memories of people who lived through it and never fully trusted a mailbox again. And somewhere, maybe, someone is writing again, because that's the thing about poison pens. Once you've tasted the power of being the one who knows, it's hard to stop. It's hard to go back to being nobody. Here's the thing I keep thinking about After Darkers. We live in a time now where this kind of thing would be even easier. Anonymous letters in a mailbox are almost quaint compared to what we have now. Digital harassment, doxing, cyberstalking. People who know your worst secrets and post them online for the world to see. The Circleville Writer was an early version of something that has only gotten more powerful and more destructive with time. We never found out who started it. We probably never will. But we can learn from it. We can see how vulnerability works, how shame works, how a single person with access to information and a willingness to weaponize it can tear a community apart from the inside. And maybe that helps us protect ourselves, helps us recognise the signs, helps us support people who are being targeted, not by believing the accusations, but by understanding the mechanism, understanding that someone somewhere is choosing to hurt them. And that says everything about the writer and nothing about the target. That's the lesson of Circleville After Darkers. The letters were never about truth. They were about power, and power always has a cost. For the writer, the cost was their own humanity. For everyone else, the cost was something they'll never get back. That's our story tonight, After Darkers. The Circleville Writer, the ghost in the mailbox. The letters that just wouldn't stop, even when they should have stopped, even when the man in prison was supposed to stop them. This is one of those cases that reminds us, sometimes the monsters aren't supernatural. Sometimes they're not even violent. Sometimes they're just someone with a pen, an envelope, and a darkness inside them that needs to hurt other people. If you enjoyed this deep dive, if it kept you company through the night, if it made you think, if it made you grateful that your mailbox is blessedly boring, please share this episode with someone you think might appreciate it. Word of mouth is how we grow, and the more After Darkers out there, the less lonely those 3 a.m. hours feel. Subscribe and explore. There's something here for everyone who's ever stayed up too late and wondered why. Thank you for spending your darkness with us, for trusting me to guide you through the shadows, for being the kind of people who look at a story like this and think, yes, I need to know. That's what makes you special. Until next time, stay weird, stay curious, stay after dark, and remember, if a letter comes for you, read it with someone you trust. You shouldn't have to face your secrets alone.